my name's Barnaby and I make and repair guitars in this small workshop in Tachikawa, and today I've got a rather odd one. This is a jazz guitar that I picked up for about 6,000 yen, that's about $50-ish, in a junk shop. And I thought, oh, you know, this is a really cool looking instrument. I love the shape of it, but it was in dreadful shape. It was in dreadful condition, I should say. And the reasons were, well, the tuners were a complete mishmash. They were bits of classical guitar tuners and leftover electric guitar tuners from everywhere. And the back of the headstock had a ton of scars in it from all of these weird things. And the body, as you can probably see, you know, there's a seam there, there's a seam on the back, and it's, you know, starting to separate a little bit. The ribs aren't looking great, and the action was a real problem. I put new strings, I put new tuners and new strings on it to test it out. It sounds wonderful, it's got this beautiful bright voice, but there are some major problems. The first one is that there doesn't actually seem to be a truss rod per se, just a sort of metal thing in the neck somehow, and some sort of insert, I guess. And we've got a problem then also with the neck here. There's a fall off, so it pulls back, and that is going to be a recurring seasonal problem, I should imagine, unless a real truss rod was put in. The weird thing is they actually put a truss rod cover here, but there's nothing to adjust underneath it, so it's very strange. It was actually nailed on. And what else? Yeah, the frets are of course completely dead, and you may or may not notice a small problem with the inlays. If it helps, this is the 12th fret. So normally you have inlays at 12, 9, 7, 5 and 3. On this guitar they've put an inlay at 10. There are also no side dots, so it's all a bit strange. The neck angle is quite low, and there's no pickup on this guitar. I'm wanting to put one there, but it's going to be hard to find one that's thin enough. One certainly won't fit here, but I might be able to get a pickup around the middle here somehow. There's a pickguard missing. There's a hole for it here and a hole for it on the side, and that's fine, I'll just make a pickguard. And there are some odd little things, this weird hole here in the bottom of the neck with a screw sticking out of it, which is obviously where a strap button was at one point. So I've been wondering what to do about this. I could completely strip it back and refinish it and do the whole thing, but then I'd have the issue that I'd lose the kind of beauty of this old instrument. It does look very attractive. So I've decided what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep it as original as possible for now. That means that obviously I've put new tuners on it. All I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the frets, I'm going to flatten the board, and then I'm going to refret it. And then I'm going to make a new pickguard, and I'll install some electronics. I will put a jack output here. And at the end of it all, with any luck, I'll have a reasonable jazz guitar. But of course, if the neck keeps shifting too much over time, eventually I'm going to have to pull this fingerboard, and I'm going to have to put in a proper truss rod. And at that point, I may do some more extensive work on it.
Fading by degrees, not believing all I see to be so.
Roughly, we've got a shape a bit like this. It's kind of like an L5 pickup, with a little bit of a curve at the end, but it's got less going on here. And that will come out parallel to the strings. Okay, let's cut this out. Now I'm going to attach this binding to this pickguard, and I'm going to be using acetone. And I'll put on layers of thin binding, one by one. It'll be like Sarah Lee. I'll be doing layer up a layer up a layer. Very straightforward. Just put a little bit of acetone on the spot where the binding is going to go. Then add our binding. And you simply hold for a few seconds. And that fixes the binding firmly in place. So now you can see the binding is on. We've got outer white, well it's an ivory, then we've got a black, a white, a black and another white. So it's a 5-ply binding and it's held down with tape. It was just put on with acetone, and very, very soon I'm going to take it off and bevel the edges. Now we can see this is trimmed, and I've taped down this strip and I'll be overlaying my black, white and black to make my compound binding for this edge. So now it's finished, 5-ply pickguard, but I was careful not to sand out all the scratches because I don't want it to look brand new. I want it to look, well, like it was new 50 years ago, which is when this guitar was made. So our pickguard is done. I will mount a pickup to this at some point in the future, but for now the front is more polished and the underneath is a kind of matte because it'll have things stuck to it. So we're done. So here I am pulling the frets up, and as is the case with a lot of vintage Japanese guitars, these frets have very, very few tangs. You probably won't be able to see it, but there are 1, 2, 3, 4 little tangs. So these frets are barely in the fingerboard, which actually is a good thing at this point because it just makes them very, very easy to remove. But it also means that during the lifetime of this guitar and similar guitars, the frets would have been popping up and down all the time. Now all the frets have been pulled, and if you take a look at the neck and I put a straight edge on it, we can immediately see our problem. There's a huge hump in the middle, and this means that of course the thing is not going to fret out properly. It's a real issue. There is no truss rod, there's just a random bit of steel in there, and we've really got like about 3 mil here. So if we take that hump down, we're going to need to work on the middle here. I'll be working on taking it right down, and I'll be sanding in a radius of 12. This has a radius of 12 at the edges, and then it's kind of flat in the middle. It's all very strangely done. It's a bit like someone had seen a guitar, but they'd never really handled one. And as I do that, you can immediately see, or maybe you can't see on the camera, this is exactly where the material is being removed, exactly as expected. So now I've leveled it out, and if I put my ruler on, you may not be able to see it, but it's flat. There's a slight fall off here, which is something you want. You can tell how much I've taken out by the fact that the binding is thicker here and thinner here, but it's a very, very small price to pay for a playable fingerboard. What I do now is I go through with progressively finer grits of sandpaper and I sand this down until I've got a nice high sheen. I also use this rather cool saw. What this is a fret slot saw, but it's specifically designed for this type of work. Because the fingerboard is bound, if I used a normal fret slot saw, I would cut through the binding. This goes into the slot and works back and forth. And what I can do then is deepen each slot using this nice little saw so that I make sure I've got enough room for frets to go in. And now what I'm going to do is simply just clean it with some naphtha. And this is great because it also has the virtue of bringing out the shine, so you can kind of see how the board looks. So just sanding in with 1500, you can see that board is really rather attractive. So we now take our wire and we feed it through the fret wire bender. It goes in here. And you can see that this bends a radius into the wire, which will then, well, we need a slight over bend, but that will become the radius of our new frets. Now the process of fretting is quite simple. We measure for our fret, we cut our fret wire to the appropriate length, and then using this rather fun tool we undercut the tang. So you may or may not see that's now cut a little thing there, and in order to clean that up I simply, let's just move the camera here, I simply place it in a little slot I have here and I run a file across it a couple of times. Then I slip the fret into its slot. Still here? Yep, you can see. I slip the fret into its slot, and today I'm fretting with a hammer. I've used other things like presses and all sorts of other stuff. Today we're going old school. We just bang the fret in until it's perfect. That being done, we take our flush cutters and we cut on each side of the fret. And there we have a guitar fret. So all I did was simply bevel the ends here, so you know they're not beautiful frets to play at the moment, but it's certainly a playable instrument. So I bought a set of new tuners for this guitar and a set of new strings, and the guitar itself was $55. The tuners are super cheap ones, but they're pretty good. They're from a company called Katana. They were like $15. So this is a cheap jazz box. Let's see what we got. Sounds pretty good to me. Fret buzz is gone. When we work up here, you can hear a tiny little bit of stuff that will be taken away by a setup. Remember, this guitar hasn't even been set up yet. I've simply beveled the end of the frets, whacked the bridge back on and tuned it up, so it still hasn't been set up for proper playing. And it sounds this good. That's very impressive. Now, I didn't have my video camera for some recent work, but you can see some of the things I've done on this guitar. It's had a bit more of a setup now, the action's been lowered a bit, and it's had a pickup installed here on the pickguard. The pickguard now also has a bracket. The pickup does actually just sit on the body, but I'll put a tiny bit of cloth between them. This plastic is interfering with the strings, but where the pickup is sitting now, when the strings are pressed down at the final fret, they don't touch the pickup, which is exactly what we want. When I pluck them hard, they don't vibrate against it. So now what I need to do is install some electronics, and for that I'll be using these wonderful things, which are thumb wheel potentiometers, and I'm going to set up a circuit using these and a capacitor, and then I'm going to run a lead out from underneath the pickguard, so these will sit sort of under here, and then I'll run a lead out from underneath the pickguard to here, and I'll install a jack here. So here is our volume and our tone control, and they are now wired up to the pickup, and I've wired them temporarily to this jack just to test it out. So now I'm going to make the hole for this jack, and this jack is good because it screws in from the outside. So here's the trick. Put a weight on a string, feed the string into your hole, drop it down. Then what you need to do is get a cute Japanese girl and tiny, tiny little hands. Pull it up. If you don't have a cute little Japanese girl, you can buy one online. Then the string
どんどん短くなっていったりして。
goes around. Goes around the wire, which is bent over. Thus, the string ties through. Thus, this is going on YouTube, you know, like that, so that it will just very simply pull straight out the hole. Then
頑張って。
out it comes.
やったー。
Isn't that amazing? Woohoo! So now we've got our guitar plugged in. I put in a small ground wire here between the bridge and the end of this jack, and it's a pretty good sound. Volume is, where is the volume? Around here somewhere. And the tone is here. Nice and straightforward. You probably can't hear me, but I put dots on the side here now. So there are side dots and they're in the correct positions, not matching the markers. We've got our pickup working. Everything's basically set up. I've even installed the side dots, which are really nice. And the one thing I really need to do now is the fret work. So obviously I've flattened the board and I've put the new frets on, but now it's time to get the action working perfectly. So for that, what we do is very simply we put these three little brass doohickeys on, about here I think, and then maybe that one can come a little further out. We do the setup with the Katana. I'm using hand support and what the inventor of this device calls X sanding, which gives the best fret coverage. So here we are. The guitar is done. We can see our pickguard with our pickup. The strings are all back on. This has been done. A button has been added here. The detached binding has been reattached. There's a jack installed in the end. There are side dots in the proper positions, and the frets have been polished. So the whole thing is now done. Take our volume back. This is the sound of the natural guitar. And then with our amp, so the pickup sounds great. I'm very, very happy with it. All in all, it's a really, really fantastic guitar. The guitar itself cost me $60 or under $60, and the parts probably about the same altogether, maybe a little more. But all in all, I'm thrilled with it.